Hey, what's up, everyone? It's Juskewycz of DailyFantasyWinners, and it's another episode of Tee to Green. And this week's tournament is the Wyndham Championship. And this is a tournament played in Greensboro, North Carolina, where it is specifically played at Sedgefield Country Club. This is a tournament that's been played here since 2007. It was at another course for a lot of the years prior, and then it was also played at Sedgefield way back, I think in like the 60s, 50s, 40s. And this is a very old tournament, played at a very old country club, old style course. But basically, this tournament has been played here at Sedgefield here over the last decade. So for your course history statistical research, you can definitely look back over here for the last decade or so if you choose to go that route. And as far as the scoring goes, usually at this tournament, it's usually a fairly scoreable course. The winning score here over the last 9-10 years or so has been between 15 and 22 under par. So we see a lot of low scores out there, a lot of birdies, and then definitely some eagles on a couple of the par fives. More on that in just a second. But specifically, this is a par 70. It tips out at 7,130 yards, so it's definitely not a long course by any means. The one special thing about this tournament, though, is the last tournament before the FedEx Cup playoffs. The FedEx Cup playoffs start at the Barclays next week, and so basically the top 125 players in the FedEx Cup standings make it to the FedEx Cup playoffs. And then if you don't, your season, unless you go play on another tour or a different kind of event, your season is done. So at least until mid-October, I guess it would be. So this is a big deal for a lot of the guys in the $6,000 range this week, as far as trying to make the playoffs and then have a chance at $10 million actually for first place for winning the FedEx Cup playoffs, and then obviously you get paid at anywhere between 1 and 25. So definitely a big tournament this week as people try and make their way into the top 125. Also, this is the second to last week before U.S. players for the United States players to qualify for the Ryder Cup team, and so and then they don't have to rely on the 4 captains picks. So it's not just obviously a big deal for the 6K players in particular. It's a big deal for a lot of the players near the very top of the DraftKings prize pool and a lot of the favorites for this week as well. So definitely a big tournament down North Carolina. Even though we're all going to get ready for football season and everything, it's still certainly a huge week in the golfing world as well. So there are 2 par 5s. It's par 70 here at Sedgefield. This hole's 5 and 15. 5 is 529 yards, and there were 27 eagles here last year. And hole 15 is only 545 yards. There were 17 eagles here last year, and that's pretty much been approximately the numbers over the last several years. So needless to say, distance is not important for recording eagles on either of these holes. There really aren't that any drivable par 4s, or or you can get close on maybe 1 or 2 of the holes, but for the most part, you'll need to hole out for any other eagles out there. So distance really not that important when it comes to the eagles. And as far as some details on this course, it's somewhat of a tight course. There are a fair amount of penalty strokes and a lot of heavily wooded areas, around the golf course. And they're small, and the greens are they're not tiny. They're not Harbor Town tiny, but they're relatively small, all things considered by PGA Tour standards. Again, though, this is a fairly easy course. But it's one of those things, if you're spraying the ball and just in terrible form off the tee, you're going to be scrambling for a lot of pars, and you're just basically not going to have many opportunities to recover for greens in regulation and have realistic birdie opportunities. And the cut's going to be, unless it's something incredibly shocking, the cut's almost definitely going to be under par, a few strokes under par this week. So it's definitely a course where, if you're in the rough, it's okay if you're just a little bit off the fairway. But if you're really mishitting it, like a 10 handicap golfer or something like that, then it can get actually a little bit ugly for you here and there. So in any case, that's kind of the quick rundown of the golf course. Some statistics to look at: definitely the strokes gained tee to green, definitely the strokes gained approaching the green. Strokes gained approaching the green, actually even more so this week, is popping out as something that is fairly critical. And then strokes gained around the green is certainly good. And the reason why I say that is because the greens are relatively small, and so you're going to have a few more people missing the greens just off the green, and so getting up and down is going to be a little bit more critical. And of course, it is a fairly scoreable course as well. So anytime you do make a little bit of a mistake, it is obviously very important that dropping a shot is essentially very bad, because not many people are going to be dropping shots out there. And then lastly, the recent form is very good. And if you go back actually to, I think I've said it around the Memorial Tournament, that recent form was going to be particularly important because of how hectic the schedule was going to be this year. While that's still true, I was a little surprised at actually how the competition wasn't as strong at some of these tournaments, maybe that we've seen in years past, and the players really did actually cut back on their schedules a little bit as opposed to trying to grind it out. And I'm not talking so much about like people, some people skipping on the Olympics. I more mean in terms of tournaments like the Quicken Loans National. That was a much weaker field this year. And, the Greenbrier was actually going to be a fairly weak field, over in West Virginia. But unfortunately, that tournament was canceled due to the flooding. But that would have been another example as well. So we actually haven't seen quite the overloaded schedule that I thought we might see back there. When it was late May. But right now is especially when the recent form is really going to kick into gear when it comes to the FedEx Cup playoffs. And there have been a lot of people playing, as of late with the PGA and the British, and even some of the top players have played in some of the other events as well. However, I want to make one point, though, with this recent form, as it pertains to the Olympics and the Open Championship. Those were completely different types of golf courses than what we're going to see here at Sedgefield, and quite frankly, probably for pretty much the rest of the golf courses through the rest of the summer/fall season, of the rest of the season up until the Ryder Cup, because obviously we had link style golf over at the Open Championship, and then what we had down in Rio was, I don't know if you could call it links golf, whether it's technically links golf or not, it's definitely very similar to links golf one way or the other. So that's pretty much the opposite of what we're going to see. It's not going to be they're going to be tree line fairways everywhere. It's not going to be nearly as windy as it was down in Rio, and the whole design is just completely different is the bottom line. So in any case, yes, recent form is something to pay attention to, but for specifically the two tournaments of the Olympics and Open Championship, I really wouldn't look into those quite nearly as much from a recent form standpoint as it comes to approaching this tournament. And one quick thing I actually wanted to dive into here, just to talk about the driving distance angle from this, is I'm not just saying that driving distance isn't that important from the driving distance will not show up very much here as far as the top leaderboard goes. If you take a look at the leaderboards of the last couple tournaments here at Sedgefield, you'll actually see the people in the top 10 or so were actually medium length hitters, or oftentimes shorter length hitters. And so let's just take a look back at 2014. Camilo Villegas, who won the tournament, was 68th in driving distance. Bill Haas and Freddie Jakobsen tied for second. Haas was 73rd. Jakobsen was 130th. Heath Slocum finished fourth. He's 166th in driving distance. Brandt Snedeker, Webb Simpson, William McGirt, Kevin Kisner, the 121st, tied for 98th, tied for 160th, and 107th in driving distance. So you're seeing all these kinds of shorter hitters. And then you'll even see it last year in 2015. Davis Love, who won the tournament, 56th in driving distance. Jason Gore, 87th. Scott Brown, 108th. You had a couple longer hitters here in Casey and Brooks Koepka, but then right again, you have Bill Haas at 82nd, Carl Pedersen 81st, Webb Simpson 97th, and then even Ben Martin and Ryan Moore at 110th and 148th. So you get the idea here on it's not even so much, I'm not saying the driving distance is like the biggest negative thing in the world, but it really in particular does not pop out this week. And if you're thinking, well, I don't see Bubba Watson, Dustin Johnson, and Jason Day on this, so that's probably part of the reason why. And it's like, well, yeah, that is a tiny bit of the reason, but like I alluded to earlier, that this is always the last event before the FedEx Cup playoffs, and usually a lot of the cheaper golfers, you'll still have some bombers down there, and they often do play in this tournament, and they just often don't fare very well. It's definitely more of the guys that are more of the better ball strikers, the guys that keep it in play, good scramblers, things of that nature. So again, it's just one of those things where, yeah, the top and bombers don't usually play in this because they're usually already in the FedEx Cup playoffs and they want a week off before the grind. But at the same time, it's even the middle of the road or the weaker players in this field. Those bombers do not do as well either. So something to keep in mind here as we move forward for these picks. And then the last thing I'll just say to add on to this is the last point I'll make on it. There were three guys last year. This is going back to the Eagles on the par 5 standpoint, there were three guys last year that had more than one eagle, and they were Webb Simpson, Morgan Hoffman, and George Kutsia. And so, yeah, there's a variance in eagles, obviously, but at the same time, those are three guys that are certainly not of the bomber variety. So just a little more evidence to throw on there as well. Excuse me. So I'm going to jump into the picks now for the tournament. We're going to give the A list on here, then we'll have the A list and the B list on the Daily Fantasy Winners forum in the golf section specifically, of course. So jumping right into it, again, definitely a reminder, this is GPP only, as we do it here every week. You can get your cash strategy out there elsewhere, or you can ask me on DailyFantasyWinners.com and talk to me on the forum or on Twitter as well. Of course, I'm always willing to talk cash strategy there, but we are dealing with just GPP strategy here. So I got two guys here in the 11,000 range. Ricky Fowler at 11,700. He is not going to be owned very highly at all because he is that's a pretty expensive for him for just kind of the recent form he's been in. But you're just going to get fantastic ownership value because of some of the people around him that'll get used more. He's also 12th on the U.S. Ryder Cup standings list. And I'm not going to say it's like, oh, it's now or never for Ricky. But at the same time, his back actually is up against the wall here a little bit because Ricky was, as of a couple months ago or a few months ago, was, I would say, borderline a lock to play on this Ryder Cup team. And obviously, his just performances in the biggest tournaments where you can get the most points has not been very good. And so his back is up against the wall here a little bit. And I do think that he's feeling. It seems like he is feeling it maybe just a little bit. I'll go back just as far as that. But and he's sixth in strokes gained tee to green. He's definitely one of the best ball strikers and is a little bit of a weaker field. I would be absolutely shocked if Fowler did not play well this weekend. He just won't have much ownership. And I really do think Fowler could easily win this golf tournament. He has a way of doing this, of popping in out of nowhere and seeming to win tournaments when you least suspect it. So I think you're going to get great ownership value there. And there's plenty of lower price golfers in this field to choose from too, to still make very good GPP lineups to go the Fowler route here. And then the second person, the 11,000 range, is Hideki Matsuyama at 11,400. He is actually the best player in this entire field as far as I'm concerned. He still will not be owned a ton. I think a lot more people are going to go for the guys in the 10K range, and then as well as Patrick Reed, of course. There are a lot of people down on him for his missed cuts at the Open Championship and the U.S. Open, but he has never been a great links golfer, and there were a lot of people who missed the cut at the U.S. Open, a lot of really good players, like Phil and Rory and several others. So I think people are looking into Hideki's bad form a little bit too much because I just don't think he's as in bad form as people think, and he's very good in the strokes gained tee degree and approaching the green department as well. Let's move down to the $9,000 range. One person here, I got Bill Haas at 9,600. Some people think he might be owned a decent amount. I don't think he's going to be owned quite as much as people think, just because of the options around him, like Tyrell Haddon, Brandt Snedeker, Webb Simpson. These are all guys that are going to be used fairly highly due to their recent form or their course history. And Haas does have some good course history here, but I do like how he statistically lines up with this course as well, and being like 21st strokes gained tee to green. And he is also, by the way, Bill Haas, if you remember last year, he was the last player, or I should say he was the last player out on the golf course for the United States in the President's Cup team and helped clinch the victory for the U.S. in the President's Cup. He is 14th right now in the Ryder Cup standings. And remember, just by the way, how the Ryder Cup works. The top 8 are the people who qualify in the Ryder Cup standings, and then the next 4 picks are just captain's picks. So Haas and Fowler are both on the outside looking in as far as qualifying for the team, but they obviously could certainly easily be captain's picks, but they definitely do not want to rely on that by any means. And the Ryder Cup absolutely means it means everything to pretty much all of these guys. So there's no doubt about it. Again, like I said, I don't like playing the ownership card a little bit too much here, but it is a nice little bonus factor to go on with how I like Haas this week. I think 9,600 is pretty reasonable for him when it comes to this field and how he correlates to this golf course. Okay, I got actually quite a few people here in the $8,000 range. We got 3 of them for the A list, which is a lot usually, but they're particularly popping out for me. So 8,900, Rafa Cabrera Bello, just a very outstanding tee to green player, and I think he's got a lot better upside than most people think. 8,700, William McGirt. He popped very highly in the Fantasy Labs model that I made, and he has quietly actually just been playing very well since his win at the Memorial. And he is 16th in the Ryder Cup standings, believe it or not. So McGirt's really been playing some extraordinary golf to get to that point, not just, a random win out of nowhere at the Memorial. He's really kind of been backing it up, even though he hasn't won or technically been right there at the end of on Sunday, but he's still been playing very good, solid golf. His just stats all season, and even especially in recent form, are just fantastic top to bottom. There really isn't a hole in his game. And I'm going to use this actually as an opportunity just to talk about one thing here when it comes to golf specifically. Players peak at vastly different times in their career. Like, yeah, like in most other sports, it makes sense to look for the top prospects and hitting their prime a few years after they turn pro, but it is much different in golf. It really is. Things click at different points in their lives. They get the right coaches and caddy, at different points, and everything like that. And the golfers just generally have a lot more flexibility and time to hit their stride. It's just because, you're not tied down to a team basically that owns you essentially, and you're stuck with the same coaches and things aren't going well with the same relationships. And a lot of times I think, yeah, some players do turn out to be busts and maybe they just weren't very good in other sports, but a lot of times it really can come down to coaching and just simply the right fit, and it just doesn't work out for some people. The players just have a lot more flexibility in who they want to work with, and they just have more time. Golfers are more durable and they can play longer careers than most other sports. So I think that's something, a lot of DFS players either just don't realize it, or they just don't, or they recognize it and they just don't really act on it. So there's while players like Jon Rahm obviously are, have very high ceilings and can be future stars certainly on the PGA Tour, their ownerships in GPPs are often significantly higher than guys like McGirt. And I know I've mentioned this a couple times, before in the past, but I don't feel like I've said it enough, and I probably didn't emphasize it enough with Jimmy Walker, even though we know Jimmy Walker's like a pretty good golfer over the last few years. But, Jimmy Walker took quite a long time to, hit his peak and hit his stride. So there are a lot of examples here, as far as, some of the older guys, peaking later in their careers and have really good value in these GPPs. So it's just something to keep in mind there. So I think you're going to get good ownership value out of McGirt there in the $8,000 range. And then the last guy in the $8,000 range is Kevin Kisner at 8,300. Just really good stats all around, and he's really getting back into that form, just generally speaking, that we saw in the 2015 season. Good consistency there. So let's move on to, I only have one player in the $7,000 range, and that's Jason Dufner at 7,900. He's showing up pretty well in the Fantasy Labs model that I made. Last few tournaments have been at courses that just don't really fit his game. This one definitely does. Excuse me, his ball striking has been fantastic. And this is a course where being just a great putter isn't that much of an advantage. He's just historically not that great of a putter. But he's 18th in strokes gained tee to green, great ball striker. This is a very good spot for Jason at 7,900. And then I'm actually dropping all the way down to the $6,000 and $5,000 range for my last few guys. There'll be more guys in the $7,000 range on the B list on the forum, just because I know there just wasn't anybody particularly standing out from 7,900 down to 6,300 here in terms of what kind of value and options you have. But moving on down to the $6,000 range, 6,300 Ches Rive, very high in the Fantasy Labs model I made. He really stood out. And he's 11th in strokes gained approaching the green. I very much like that. And then there's two guys at the $6,000 mark, Chad Campbell and Roberto Castro. As far as Campbell goes, he's always a great play on the shorter courses, 34th in strokes gained tee to green. And then Castro, very good upside. You've seen a couple top 10 finishes from him, not in the too distant future, or too distant, recent memory, I should say. But he has statistically right now has no holes in his game at all from this season or even a recent performance standpoint. And he is 30th in strokes gained tee to green and 29th in strokes gained approaching the green, which is very good for somebody priced at $6,000. That's really good for definitely. So I think he's actually pretty underpriced there. And then the last one I'm going to mention at 5,400 is Michael Kim. He should honestly, for what his statistics show, he should be about $1,000 more expensive. And he's just because he hasn't had that top 5 finish for why his price hasn't popped. He's a great buy low option. You honestly could probably talk me into recommending him for even a cash play borderline, just because his cut made percentage is that good and his statistics back it up. So you could really use him honestly in both formats if you wanted to. But certainly a GPP play at 5,400, and he just doesn't usually get much ownership at all. So in any case, that's all for the picks. Again, you can check out the A list and the B list on the forum at DailyFantasyWinners.com. And as always, if you haven't done it already and continue to enjoy the videos, please like and subscribe to our YouTube and Twitch channels. And on top of that, we're going to have a lot of NFL content coming up. Me, Danny, and Max are really gearing up for a really good NFL season. I'm going to be fully invested in NFL as opposed to split between NFL and college this year because sadly no college football daily fantasy this year, which really bums me out. But it is what it is. And so we're gearing up with a lot of NFL content, which will be starting in the very near future for that. And then as for me, you can follow me at Juskewycz on Twitter and Daily Fantasy Winners on Twitter at DFSnerd. All right, guys, thanks.